As ever, welcome to Brooklands. Thank you for being here and supporting the Trust. A special warm welcome to our guests. Hope you're enjoying the evening and it's good to see you. I'd particularly like to welcome some people. First of all, Sally Jocelyn and her family. You're very welcome to be here. Ron Ayres and Richard Noble, both very welcome and good to see you. For those who don't know me, and most of you do by now, I'm Steve Clark and I have the pleasure of organising and hosting these events along with the team. Now, apart from the microphone issue tonight, I was quite a happy man. We have the perfect place, the perfect audience, and I think the perfect subject this evening. So will you welcome the perfect presenter, Karl Ludvigsen.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure to be with you this evening. I am so excited to be talking to you about Reid Railton. Let's just start back at Cherry Tree House in Alderley Edge in Cheshire. Reid was born in 1895, and here we see him a few years later on the back lawn of the house with various hoops, tracks and devices and so on, setting up a track of some kind. We don't know the details, but it's clearly a motor track. He did build a kind of soapbox derby car in his youth. We don't have pictures of that, unfortunately. We do, however, have him behind the wheel of the family's new Sunbeam 2530 horsepower car. This was the top of the Sunbeam range, an 800-pound automobile in 1912, Railton 17. He's just checking out the controls and making sure everything is in order. He studied at the University of Manchester, as it would be called today. It had a little different name in those days, but he graduated with honors in mechanical engineering. He immediately was given an apprenticeship at Leyland up in Lancashire, and then completing the apprenticeship, he was made assistant to Perry Thomas, who was chief engineer. He shared, in a way, the chief engineering with another chap, but he was in charge of the design and engineering of Leyland products. The Leyland people got it into their heads that around 1917 or there, that they should be in the airplane engine business, because they're in the middle of the war. The Air Force, the RAF, as it became, needed engines for their aircraft, and the people at Leyland had given this job to another fellow, and when Perry Thomas came in around that time, he said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to design the engine from scratch. And the Leyland people said, fine, which was interesting because he had never designed an engine in his life. But he came up, with Railton's help, with a 7.2, no, that's not right. An aero engine, an X8 design, practically all aluminum, overhead cams, shaft-driven overhead cams, and a built-in starter motor next to the crank. It had a system of water cooling through the crankshaft to the main bearings, etc. An extraordinarily advanced and amazingly light engine for its time. Railton was called away to the service during the development of this engine, so he didn't take part in all of it, but he had quite a bit to do with it. It did not make production. It was a bit late in wartime, and it didn't reach production, but it was a fantastic technical exercise. As was the next thing that Leyland decided to do, which was to make a luxury car. After the war, number of companies, Guy, a truck maker, started making a luxury car, and Leyland did the same. Here's Perry Thomas, who was, of course, chief engineer of this effort on the Leyland 8. He, as Railton would put it, thought everything through from scratch. There was no, oh, we'll do it like other people do it with the Perry Thomas. Here he is at the wheel of his one of his test cars for the Leyland 8. This was a 7.2 liter straight 8, one of the very first straight 8s to be made in the UK. It hasn't always been given credit for that. The features of the car, which was called the Lion of Olympia by the press in 1920, and in 1921 it was called the first supercar, and it really was a supercar. It had a torsion bar, anti-roll bars front and rear, at the rear compound torsion bar and leaf spring suspension, all aluminum engine. Nothing in the car was standard. Absolutely all of it was dreamed up from scratch by Perry Thomas and Railton. They shared quarters in the area, and they'd spend late nights talking about what they were going to do with the Leyland 8. And just an idea of the beauty and the engineering that went into the chassis. That's a sports version with lightened frame members, of course, and it had vacuum-assisted brakes. One of the very first uses of vacuum assistance known. Throughout, the car was a work of art, really. It did not do much in the way of business for Leyland. After the war, they made about 18 cars in total. But it did give Railton a trip to India, because a chap out there, one of the top sahibs, bought two of them, and Railton went out to instruct the mechanics in how to maintain these cars, which were pretty elaborate. Just a quick look at the engine. It used three connecting rods to drive the overhead camshaft. All the passages were cast into the block. You can see the inlet and exhaust passages were all integral with the block of the engine. Single overhead cam operating through rocker arms, for which it was only one cam lobe. So the cam lobe operated both the inlet and exhaust valves. The rear axle, he wanted to have an axle that had a slight positive camber, which is the same as Daimler or Mercedes did at that time, which was better to deal with the crown road surfaces of the day. So, but he didn't do it the way Daimler did it. He did it partly the way they did, which is with two ring gears and pinions, but he put the differential at the input to the differentials at the input to the axle gears right here. So very good looking cars. As I say, there were town cars, roadsters, cabriolets produced. And the Leyland, I think, made the last cars sometime around 1925 or thereabouts. But Thomas was a fascinating man. He didn't know how to drive before he started this lark with Leyland, but he caught up very quickly. He learned to be a pretty darn good driver, and the attraction of Brooklands was too great. So at one point he said to the chaps at Leyland, look, I'd like to take one of our cars and just, drop off some accessories and sort of lighten it a bit. And then we can show people at Brooklands how quick it is and how reliable and so forth. We'll do some demonstrations. And one thing led to another, and pretty soon the car you see there looked like this. And you can see it's the same basic car. The frame is the same, and the anti-roll bars are in place and so on. But here it's being tested on the road with Railton riding side saddle with with Perry Thomas. And this was, at the time, one of the fastest cars at Brooklands. It was capable of lapping in the high 120s, around 130. Thomas raced it very successfully against heavyweight rivals at Brooklands. There's another shot of Thomas with Railton in the car during some testing that they were carrying out. Thomas was a meticulous tester, except he would not test on Fridays. Fridays were off limits for him. He didn't do any testing on Fridays. I don't know why, but he had some reason for doing that. After the war, this was getting into about 1923 when he built this racing version of the Leyland. And the Leyland people said to him, Perry, we love you, but you either have to be our chief engineer or you have to be a racing driver. And he'd really been hooked by Brooklands, and so he said, I'll leave and I'll take up racing at Brooklands. And he did. With success, and his assistant, Railton, left at the same time. They had access at the time to some new development engines that Leyland had, about 1.5 liter, 4-cylinder overhead cam engines. And that resulted in a certain number. Perry Thomas used them for some vehicles. And Railton took one and modified it in 2-liter form and put it in an available chassis. This is the result. And this is about 1924. And the SR Special, he did this together with Henry Spurrier III, who was about his age and was a Leyland, the son of a Leyland chief. And this became the Spurrier Railton Special. And he wrote on the back of this picture, this is the first car that I made. This is my first car, really. From that development of the engine for that car, he produced the power unit for his own car, which was the Arab, which he arranged for he did the complete design and production of this car. The engine was, as I say, 2-liter overhead cam. This one has a single carburetor. Some had twin carburetors. They got a very good press comments. They never appeared in any motor show. They were produced in various body styles. This is one of the Arabs, a very handsome coupe. They were raced by private owners. This was at, I think, Shelsley, I think. No, Prescott, I think. Yeah, Shelsley, okay. Did quite well there. He also produced a low profile version of the Arab, which is a pretty rakish proposition. There were only 2 of these made, and these were really made at a later date, around 1927, which was a crucial year for Railton, because that's the year that his friend Perry Thomas crashed at Pendine Sands in the Babs record car that is out here in one of the garages. Railton was not there at the time, but he arrived very soon afterward and assisted in trying to figure out exactly what had caused the crash. Perry Thomas had property at Brooklands. He had a house, not really a house, it's kind of a bungalow called the Hermitage, where he lived, and he had workshop facilities here, and he was assisted by Ken Thomson, a New Zealander, helped him with business matters, and Ken Taylor, who was an excellent machinist and mechanic. And they had been working with Thomas, and they had the idea of setting up on their own, sort of taking over the Thomas patrimony, if you will, and forming Thomson Taylor engineers, and that was all very well. They could do that. They managed that quite effectively, but they didn't have a chief engineer. And here was Railton sort of getting on with his Arab car and so forth, and they talked it over, and he became the chief engineer of Thomson Taylor in 1927. And the last Arabs were built at TNT here at Brooklands. Another quite different project was underway at the time that Reid arrived at TNT. This was backed by the Riley Company, the building of a special sporting car using the 1.1 liter Riley overhead valve engine, which was proving to be a terrific little engine. As probably most of you know, it was quite sensationally lively for its size, had high-placed camshafts with rocker arms to the incline valves and so on. Very, very neat little engine. And the Riley people said, yes, let's see what you can do down there at TNT in making a sporting version. And this was supposed to have been, the story is this was started by Perry Thomas, but it wasn't really. Nothing had been done to speak of when Thomas died. So Railton got to work on it, and here he's demonstrating the lowness to the ground of the first prototype of the Riley Brooklands. In this car, as you can see, he sank the seats below the frame. The frame ran right along here and very high, much as in the standard car, and then it was tweaked together at the back. But that is the prototype, and he raced that car at Brooklands quite successfully. This is he made a few racing efforts at Brooklands, and this was one of them. It lapped very close to 100 miles an hour, which for a 1.1 liter car was regarded as sensational at the time. But he wasn't satisfied with that approach, and so he used some of his experience with the Arab. In the Arab, the frame of this sports model was very low. It was just really low, and it was underslung at the rear. And then it went up to the engine bearers. And he used the same technique for the production Riley Brooklands, with the frame down at the bottom, underslung at the back, and then curving up at the front to join the built-in bearers of the Riley 4. And here he is with one of the 4 cars that TNT prepared to compete in the TT in Ireland in 1928. A Brooklands Riley did win, but it wasn't one of the win its class, but it wasn't one of the works prepared cars. The TNT people became very involved in racing these cars. They managed teams, managed the pits, and prepared the cars for racing for Riley. And Riley liked it so much and realized that they had a hot property on their hands. So after 20 were made by TNT, Riley took over the production of the Brooklands, as it became known. I don't know how many were made. Someone may know, something more than 100 certainly. Another job around that time was a special one-off or two-off, I think, for Daimler. Daimler had, as you may remember, a big adventure with sleeve valve engines. And they had a big sleeve valve, 12 cylinders, 7.1 liters, 150 horsepower. And they had a few lying around, and they had the idea of, they had a customer or two in mind, and they engaged TNT and Railton to design a chassis that would be a low slung chassis that would use this engine. And this is the first of the ones that he did. I think this still has a conventional gearbox, but the ultimate car, as produced, had a pre-selector gearbox, and this is around 1930, and this is just the time that people were starting to use pre-selectors. And Railton at T&T was a pioneer in the adaptation of pre-selector transmissions to motor cars of various kinds. He came up with a very unusual way at the rear of having an underslung frame, underslung springs, and very, very compact design at the back of the car tubular structure back here to hold the rear spring mounts and the heavy tires and so forth. And this produced ultimately one of the most phenomenal looking automobiles ever to take the road. Really a stunning car. I think there is some controversy about how many there were. Were there one? Were there two? Were there three? I tend to favor two, but you could get when you get with Daimler people, there's a lot of different speculation about it. But this car still exists in this form, and it's a concours winner wherever it chooses to go. A wonderful machine. Now, a new engine enters the T&T world. This is a cross-section of the Napier Lion engine. It was a W12, 3 banks of 4 cylinders. This is the racing version. I have pictures of the regular version in the book, of course, but this one made originally for aircraft racing. This was made for the Schneider Trophy racing in amphibian aircraft. And particularly for the aircraft use, they wanted to make it as compact as possible, so it has very short connecting rods, short links to the side cylinders and so forth. Everything was made more compact, the very tight coverage on the engine and so forth, the ball bearing for the crankshaft, main bearings and so forth. The Napier Lion turned out to be a really, really good engine, very versatile and useful in a lot of different vehicles, as we will see later on. It was so good that it spoiled Napier. They went into the 30s not developing any new engines, and eventually this kind of caught up with them, and they tried to rush ahead of themselves, and anyway, it didn't help in the long run. It didn't help, but in the short run, they made a lot of money out of the Napier Lion. The use of the Napier Lion, let me just check my notes. Yeah, the first Napier Lion that Railton had contact with was the supercharged version, also developed for the Schneider Trophy racing. And on the genius that he was in terms of getting things from people, Malcolm Campbell got the loan of one of these engines for a land speed record effort. And he had put one in a car, but it hadn't performed very well. And he came to talk to Railton about it. It had been developed originally by Amherst Villiers, Joseph Maina, and so forth, and it hadn't really done justice to the engine. And he came to see Railton, and they talked about it, and pretty soon the car was hauled up to T&T, and Railton and Taylor started to get to grips with it. This is the car under construction. This is what we call Bluebird 3. These are not official numbers, but they give an idea of the stage of development of the car. The big job that Railton had with the Bluebird 3 was to lower the driving seat. And he did this by making an offset rear axle and a transmission that drove through the input shaft was low, and it was all indirect gears, so it drove through all the gears to the output shaft, driving shaft. So that allowed the driver to sit much lower in the car. And here's Reid with Ken Thomson, Ken Taylor, Malcolm Campbell, of course, and here's Railton in his typical posture. Don't look at me. I'm not important. I didn't do anything. I'm just you know, you just happened to catch me here by mistake. You know, he's a very, very self-effacing individual. And you'll see this again, this posture. Anyway, this became the power unit of Bluebird 3. And in 1931, they achieved almost 246 miles an hour with this at Daytona. And in 1932, almost 254. So pretty good going with the engine and car. This is a view of this Napier-powered Bluebird 3, which in my view is one of the prettiest of the land speed record cars, certainly of this era. A very handsome automobile. Here being demonstrated, where? At Brooklands, of course. Now, Campbell, next, as Railton wrote somewhere, he said, you can imagine as an engine engineer who was settling back and reflecting on the result of a job well done, he said, Malcolm Campbell came to me and said, looks like the Air Ministry, are going to loan me a Rolls-Royce R-type engine. Now, the Rolls-Royce R-type engine was on the secret list big time. It was another engine developed for the Schneider Trophy racing aircraft. I think Rolls-Royce only made about 8 or 9 or 10 of them, not very many. It was strictly for racing. And he said, I'd like you to sort of put that into my car. And Campbell had a little bit of a fetish, which was very frustrating to Railton, which was that he liked keeping part of the previous car so he could keep on calling it the Bluebird. He didn't like the idea that anything would be discarded, or if it had to be discarded, it had to be, but he liked the continuity. It was just the kind of thing that he had about the car. And Railton, of course, would have preferred a more thoroughgoing approach, but he said, okay, fine, I'll see what I can do. And here they are in the garage at T&T, running up the engine in the car, and that's, of course, Campbell and Railton, with basically the same car, but with the Rolls-Royce engine installed. And this produced a very aggressive-looking streamliner, very, very potent-looking automobile, of which Campbell was justly proud. And in 1933, they went 272.1 miles an hour at Daytona with this car. So that was not bad, but I think they felt that considering the power of this engine, which was on the order of 2,000 horsepower, they should have gone faster, and that was kind of their feeling. So they thought they rebuilt the car. This is during the rebuilding process. Again, Railton, I think over here, yeah, again with this sort of, I'm not really here. Campbell, and then Ken Taylor. And you'll see that there are twin rear wheels, so that's one way to get more power onto the road, onto the sand as it happens, doubling the traction. He lengthened the chassis, had a new frame made, and also planned to have a air brake, which was operated by this big vacuum cylinder back here. And that was finally Railton managed to get rid of the original steering, which dated back to Bluebird 1, and put in a different steering system, much simpler and so forth. This is the 1935 car, a pretty impressive automobile, really. This did get people's attention. Railton was pretty sure that the way they did this Bluebird was just to really put clay in the wind tunnel model over the cylinder heads of this V12, and they hadn't really thought the aerodynamics through. And he felt that this was causing a lot of turbulence around the upper part of the car. So that's why they went to a quite new body in which these engine covers are really beautifully fared in and so forth. And here was a front air intake for cooling, which was designed to have a shutter, so that when you hit the measured mile or were approaching the measured mile, you could shut that, and that would obviously reduce drag. And the theory being that you could certainly get through the mile, which takes you, I don't know, 8 seconds or whatever it takes, and then open it again, and without unduly cooking the engine. Not to spoil my story, but I will. This picture points out something that becomes a problem later. That's the position of this air inlet scoop. That's the air inlet to the engine. Now, if we go back here, we see that air inlet is right there, right in the front, very aggressively placed where it can get a lot of air. In this design, it's at the exhaust of the air from the radiator. This is where the radiator air comes out, this slot, and hot air comes out and back, and this is probably pretty turbulent around here. And this turns out to be a big mistake. And the result is that they go to Daytona in 1935, and they go 276.8 miles an hour, and that's what, about, less than 4 miles an hour faster than they did with the previous setup, and they really thought, wow, something's wrong here. This is the car as it ran at Daytona. You can see the rear air brakes in place. A fantastic car, but that was a fault. That was a fault because the R-Type wanted a clear, clean, cold air inlet under pressure. When they rectified that and took it to Bonneville later in 1935, it did an average of 301.1 miles per hour. So job done, really. That was Campbell's personal goal. That's the speed he wanted to reach in his land speed career, and he did, thanks to a lot of work by TNT and Railton. Speaking of Campbell, I just have to show you this quite fabulous car. I just love this picture. He's herding it around the Brooklands, one of the Brooklands road courses. It's one of 2 V12 4-liter Sunbeams that Campbell bought from Sunbeam, heavily modified by TNT to Railton's designs, front axle, brakes, frame. They basically built a new car around the engines. And at that time, of course, twin rear wheels were becoming the real deal for hill climbing and for tight Brooklands courses. And these cars also had pre-selector transmissions. And this was considered the first time that a pre-selector was used in a racing car. Of course, the pre-selector is essentially a planetary gear transmission, which you engage by using what looks like a clutch pedal. You just select the next ratio when you want it. You push the clutch pedal-ish. It's not a clutch pedal. It's a gear engaging device, and it puts you in the next gear. And Campbell really became sold on the merits of that, and a lot of other people did too. But Railton was the first to put this into use. Another important customer, was Whitney Straight, an American who had come over and who, by his unbelievable driving skill, attracted the attention of everybody at Brooklands. He bought Tim Birkin's Maserati and lapped the mountain course faster than Birkin, which was considered impossible. Nobody could be faster than Birkin, but he was. And for 1934, he put together a team of Maseratis for the new Grand Prix season, set up a company of which Railton was a director to race them. And this is one of the Maseratis with a special cowl, also with pre-selector transmissions, a number of other modifications, a special supercharger drive, and so forth. That these cars ultimately won a lot of races, but they weren't successful in Formula One, or which it was in those days. 1934 also was the introduction of the Mercedes-Benz and Auto Union Grand Prix cars, and a reworked Maserati wasn't quite going to get the job done. But Whitney Straight had a great time while it lasted, and he retired and became head of British Airways, as it wasn't called that then, but I can't remember all the different names it's had. But so he did well, and he warmly remembered Railton. Now we have another application for a Napier Lion. The Napier Lion was also originally made as an unsupercharged engine, developing around 530 horsepower. And John Cobb, on the right, he loved big cars. John Cobb came to Brooklands, more or less untutored, bought the biggest, fastest cars he could find, and drove the pants off them. Won races in spite of the handicap system at Brooklands. He went up through, he had a V12 Delage that had broken the land speed record. He raced that at Brooklands. He loved big cars, and he knew how to drive them. And as Railton said, he knew how to put his foot to the floor with these cars. Not everybody knew how to do that. And he came to Railton in 1933 and said, I would like a car that I can use for record breaking and also use for racing at Brooklands. Okay, and here for a change was a chance to design a car from scratch. And we see Cobb with Ken Taylor here, and the carburation system of the W12 Napier, and everything is special. Straight front axle, underslung frame at the front, special arrangements of the dampers, very, very, very robust but light construction. At the rear, extremely unusual arrangement of, as you could see in the car today. You may have looked at it and thought, well, what the heck is all that? There are two semi-elliptic springs on each side, one above and one below the axle. And they, in effect, the rear parts act like twin trailing arms guiding the axle. The way that they're mounted with these trunnions here and so forth, means that the whole rest of the rear of the frame doesn't have to do anything. There's no work being done there except holding up the fuel tank. And that's wonderful, because this was a feature that he installed in order to give the suspension the flexibility that it needed to do both the jobs that Cobb wanted, both to race fast at Brooklands, which has its fair share of bumps, and to be good for record breaking wherever it would go. So this was a completely unique rear suspension concept. Big Borgenbeck clutch, not a pre-selector. He used for this a straightforward 3-speed gearbox. Rear axle had its own sump. This is probably the original sump. They made it quite a lot larger after the early runs of the car. The axle got a bit warm. The rollout of the car. Here Railton is in a little more prominent position. He's right there with Cobb. Here's Ken Taylor. Here's here's Ken Thomson, sorry, and Ken Taylor over here, and some of the crew at TNT. And I just hope one day the car has wheels like that. It's still running with wheels like it had after the war. Just a little word to the wise here. It'd be really wonderful to see the car on the wheels that it actually used in the pre-war years. Here you get another look at this very complex but clever suspension system. The Cobb car became, at Brooklands, of course, this is the Napier Railton. It became a legend. It set the lap record for the circuit at 143.44 miles an hour in 1935, and that's a long time back. There were what, 4 more years of racing, or 3.5 anyway, and nobody beat it. It wasn't beaten. That's pretty remarkable. A lot of people tried, but they didn't succeed. It went to Montlhéry. At the time was considered, in France, the big bank track at Montlhéry was considered better than Brooklands. It was a tad newer. It was made in the early 1920s, and it was thought to be the better place to go record breaking. And that was true up to a point. And up to a point when the car spun out of control and went into the infield, and the French had to get a tank out to haul it out of the ditch that it ended up in. Luckily, nobody was hurt on this occasion, but it did show the limitations of the Montlhéry circuit. So in 1935, after much discussion, Ab Jenkins in Utah had urged the use of the Bonneville salt flats. And he put on a campaign to Campbell and to Railton, because he knew that Railton had a lot to do with what would happen with these record cars. And he finally sold Railton on the idea that they ought to try going to Bonneville, which they did in the late summer of 1935. And here's the Cobb entourage with the Napier Railton and a Ford in the foreground as they were at Bonneville that year. They were the first Europeans to go to Bonneville to set records, and they set records. This car performed as designed and went there and set records and came back. And I mentioned Campbell going to Bonneville in 1935. He went after Cobb. So Cobb showed the way. In spite of that, when Campbell showed up there, he got out on the salt and he said, "No way I can drive on this. It's terrible. I can't. Why did you send me out here anyway?" But that was his nature. And he eventually figured out that it was a pretty good surface. It really was an amazing surface, actually. 1936, the car came back. Here, there are a few features that are a little different. There's a kind of, the exhaust pipe here is manifolded so that it's not, flames aren't coming out in front of the driver at night to disturb him. We have very large section tires on front versus the ones on the back. This is the Ludvigsen theory, is that is to reduce understeer, make it easier to keep the car on the 10-mile circle that they used for record breaking. The ultimate, here's another tweak that was introduced for the 1936 season at Bonneville, was a starter. This is a car starter. It's a starter motor with a bevel drive to this engageable wheel that can, operate against the rear wheel to start the car, because the problem was that if the engine stalled somewhere on the 10-mile circle that was pretty far away, you'd have a lot of trouble getting the car going again. Railton dreamed this up, and the boys at TNT designed and made it, and fabricated it and installed it. The ultimate record set included 167.7 miles an hour for 1 hour, and 150.16 miles per hour for 24 hours. Those were the top records that the car set. Pretty good going. And they were eventually, in the latter part of the 30s, beaten by George Easton with a much more advanced car, and by Ab Jenkins. He built a new car with an aero engine and so on, and he went faster. But when Cobb and the Napier Railton were running, they were very fit competitors. Another task came to TNT. Raymond Mays had convinced Humphrey Cook to fund a building of a team of single-seater racing cars. These were the first purpose-built British road racing automobiles, the ERAs, which were launched in 1934. And so they started to work on it in 33, and Railton and TNT got the assignment of designing and building the chassis complete of these cars. They built the engines at Bourne, the ERA headquarters. They were based on a Riley engine. They were made in 1.1, 1.5, 2 liter sizes. But the suspension was quite straightforward. It was another one of these jobs, as Railton said, that people didn't want too much money spending on. So he didn't try anything too fancy. He kind of went along the sort of Alfa Romeo lines of the time, except he hung the leaf springs rather differently, did some different things with the drive shaft arrangements, and used the pre-selector transmission again. As a hallmark of the designs he was using. And here's Raymond Mays trying one out at Brooklands, testing one of the cars. And during the 30s, the 1.5 liter class, the Voiturette class, was very popular in Europe. There were races all over the continent for Maseratis, Bugattis, and ERAs, and the ERA became a popular car, if you can call that, a racing car popular. They made a decent number of them, and they were racing every weekend all over the continent, very, very successfully through 36, 37. By 38. The Maseratis and Alfa Romeos were catching up with them. They weren't as successful. but they gave a lot of people a lot of very, very good racing. And they raced after the war. They competed in the first Grand Prix races of the 1940s and early 1950s as well. So the ERA became a kind of a legendary success story for British racing. And this picture is just meant to show that there were quite a lot of them on the grid sometimes. And they were pretty successful. A friend of Railton's was a fellow named Noel Macklin. Macklin was the man behind the Invicta car. And in the early 1930s, 1933, thereabouts, 32, the demand for the Invicta was folding up. It was fading away. People were not keen on buying these expensive big cars. The guys at Macklin's residence and the workshops behind it were looking around for something else to do. And they discovered the Hudson Terraplane, which was a remarkably lively American six-cylinder car initially, then an eight-cylinder car made by the Hudson Company. And they thought, maybe we could make something out of this Terraplane that would be attractive and interesting for the UK market. And they came up with the idea of the Railton car. And this is quite a nice sketch by Max Miller showing the basic idea of the original Railton, which they called it. He said, Macklin said, do you mind if we name this car after you? And he said, no, but he said privately, he said, I hope this isn't going to do too much to what I consider to be my reputation, one way or the other. All in all, the Railton car enhanced his reputation. Luckily, through the 30s, the Railton was a very, very valid and very exciting motor car. Just a little tweak here, technical tweak. One of the features of the Terraplane chassis was this sheet metal plate, steel plate that was attached to the frame and to the bottom of the body. So it gave a very robust attachment of the two without adding a great deal of weight. So the car was very well thought out. It had, I won't call it a great competition career, but it did compete in some events, and Railton took it with his friend and colleague Sammy Sampietro on outings to test the car for use in long-distance rallies like the Alpine Rally. And here he's in Italy on one of the passes during this adventure. The Railton was in its most sporting form, light sports tourer form. It accelerated from 0 to 60 in 8.5 seconds, which for the time was phenomenal. People just couldn't believe the performance of these Railtons. The secret was that at the time when it was launched, they put a lot of effort into keeping it light. They made it as light as possible. And this drove their coach builders crazy, but they did succeed in getting them to build light cars. And the combination of a big American engine and a light car was amazing acceleration. And the one that really carried the mail was the light sports tourer, of which this is perhaps the most familiar photograph. This is the editor of Autocar, Mr. Linfield, with his pipe firmly clenched between his teeth at the top of the test hill here at Brooklands. No car had come up the test hill with anything like the robustness of the light sports tourer. Railton only built 2 of these, if I'm correct, from the factory, but there are quite a few more now because this is quite an easy thing to make if you take all the gubbins off of a Railton frame. The Railton car did win a good reputation for Reid and some earnings, because obviously he did have a license arrangement with Macklin, and he was interested in what was happening with the car. He didn't contribute greatly to the engineering, but he was involved, and he was very he was interested in what Macklin's policy was on the types of car to build and so forth. So they had a lively relationship in that respect. And just an idea of other Railtons were more elegant, and they progressively got heavier as customers wanted more luxurious bodies and so on. So during the 30s, the performance was said to suffer somewhat, but still pretty remarkably good. And they were impressive cars, as we saw several of them here today, thank goodness. The MG people, MG people were having, during the 1930s, big battles with Austin. I mean, who would be the first to 100 miles an hour with a 750cc car, and battles like that. You know, they were, and George Easton was on the Austin side, and then he moved over to MG, worked with them. There was a terrific competition between the two companies, and so MG then, this was a racing, sporting tradition that really helped sales of the MG car. MG was sold in around 1937 or 8 to Nuffield Group. And in spite of that, Goldie Gardner, who had raced MGs and set records in Germany with MG, conventional MGs, started up a bit, streamlined somewhat, was keen to make a faster car. And he convinced Lord Nuffield that this would be worth spending some money on, even though MG wasn't in road racing anymore. He said he thought making some kind of a competition car for record breaking would be a good idea. And so he funded the building of such a car, which was the EX 135. Here we have Railton, Goldie Gardner, very tall, difficult to get into a small car. Lord Nuffield, and why am I not thinking of his name? The head of MG at the time. It'll come to me. Anyway, he was still active at MG, but he was fading out a little bit, as I am apparently. But the concept of this car, they asked Railton. They said, "Look, we want to make a fast car," and so he conceived the car, the shape, the height or the lack of height, which was radical for the day. No cars were as low as this. No competition cars of any kind, or shaped as elegantly. And they said, "Don't you want to take that into the wind tunnel?" He said, "No." He said, "I think I've fussed around with these cars enough now. I know pretty much how it should be shaped." And so he gave MG a big mock-up with the various stations indicated by bulkheads and so on, and they made the body. And they fitted it onto a chassis that they had made, something they made previously, which was a very straightforward K3, racing K3 frame, but with the drive shaft located in an angle, engine, gearbox, and axle at an angle across the car so the driver could sit very low. And as you could see, Goldie Gardner was a pretty tall chap, and to fold him into this car was no small achievement. The rear axle housing is right over against the rear left rear hub. Very straightforward suspension, nothing special. And they based their initial efforts on engines based on a 6-cylinder overhead cam Wolseley unit with a supercharger. A quadratic steering wheel because there's no room for a full steering wheel in this car, or need for one really. And if you want to see a gorgeous record breaker, I think this will do the job. This is the EX 135, and it was first shown. The first picture was its launch that was in July of 1938. Gardner is here on the special road built in Germany for record breaking. This was a stretch of Autobahn that was paved across completely from one side to the other. When they weren't using it for record breaking, they put, like stanchions and flags and things in the middle of the road, so the people wouldn't be driving willy-nilly all over the place. But it was a completely paved road, as you can see here. A phenomenal stretch of road, which was about 15 miles long, including a couple of gently curved sections at the ends. In May of 1939, with a 1.1 liter engine, he was timed there at 203.5 miles per hour for the kilometer, 203.2 miles per hour for the mile. No, yeah, for the mile. It was a phenomenal accomplishment. The first time they ran the car was at a different venue in Germany late the year before. Late the year before. And Gardner came to the end of his first run, and he asked one of the mechanics to come over, and he said, "Greg, what gear am I in? What gear am I in?" It went so fast that he thought it must, and he saw on the tack, the figure, it was so high, he thought he was in third gear. He thought maybe he forgot to shift into high. The car was the air did not exist for this car. There was no air in the world that could slow it down. It had a fantastic career, this car. It set records. At one time, it held of the 10 classes, it held records in 5 of them. The 5 smallest, from 2 liters down to 350 cc. And Gardner got it out again after the war, set more records. The MG EX 135 was perhaps it's considered by some experts as the most outstanding record breaker of any time at all. And these speeds that it did at Dessau on this road were the fastest that it ever accomplished. And when Gardner was no longer well, MG retired the car. They said, "We're not going to let anybody else drive this car. This is Gardner's achievement, and we don't want it to. We want it to end its career along with his." So this was something very, very, very special. A car that Railton deserves a lot of credit for. No one else could have conceived this amazing vehicle. Speaking of amazing vehicles, we have the Railton Special. This good rear view of the shape. He experimented with 5 different shapes in the wind tunnel for a new record breaker of the world speed record for John Cobb. John had raised his ambitions. He wanted to go after the world speed record. And the challenge was to, the challenge was to use 2 supercharged Napier Lion engines, because that's what Cobb had. He had 2 supercharged Lion engines. He didn't have a lot of Rolls-Royce engines lying around and so on, but he did have two engines that had been used in a racing hydroplane before, and they would have to suffice for the car. I can just go ahead to show you the structure of the car, in which the engines are placed in a sort of diagonal position. This being the front engine drives the rear wheels. This being the rear engine drives the front wheels. They drove through 3-speed manual gearboxes, and adjacent to which were drum-type brakes. These were the brakes of the car. These were all the brakes of the car. There's one here. There's one right there, and they're water cooled. Railton said, "Look, he ice cooled the car." Opening for ice. This was the original construction of the car in 1938 with the right ice tank over there. He said, "We will put ice in here." Obviously, the water is being circulated around the ice and so on. But after we've run through the mile, we don't have any need for this water, so we'll use it to cool the brakes. So the system automatically, when Cobb applied the brakes, delivered water to all inside and outside of the external contracting brake drum right on the drive shaft of the car. At the first series, they did have an air brake here, but they didn't really use it. It turned out not to be necessary. Remarkably, this car weighed only, what have I got here? It weighed only 7,600 pounds. Now that's not a lot when you consider those engines probably weigh 1,700 pounds each or something like that. I should have looked that up, but I haven't. But they, to make a car that light, well, one of the ways he did it was the frame. The frame is a backbone frame which runs between the engines in an S-shaped pattern back to the rear wheels, which are suspended by two upper radius rods and a lower triangle, and the front wheels, which are suspended by upper and lower wishbones. And I put a lot of effort into trying to understand this car. The details of this car have never been properly explained until now. I can say that with the help of an engineer friend of mine, we figured out everything about the Railton Special, and it was very frustrating at times trying to get straight exactly what they did, and the changes that they made between 1938 and 39, very significant changes in the suspension. Fantastic car. I was just determined to figure out everything, and there's only one thing I don't quite understand, but which I will mention. Here's where Cobb is sitting. There was no place else to put him. There's no room in the car for a cockpit anywhere else other than right at the front. And the attitude from Cobb would be, if you say that's where it should be, Reid, that's where we'll put it. And that was his, he had total confidence in what Railton would do with the design of this car. And here, of course, is Reid Railton, chaps working on the body in the background. And these are slave wheels. They were not the wheels used in the record runs. Okay. Fantastic. And just speaking of the S-shaped frame, this is a look down the inside of the S-shaped frame. As one of the draftsmen said, he said there was considerable excitement in the office when the chaps came in carrying this frame. Of course, they didn't all know what all the pieces were that were fitting together in this car, but when two mechanics came into the workshop bringing this frame in, they really had a bit of a field day, thinking, what on earth is this all about? And you know, there are little details like tension rods in here supporting outer bearers for the body and so on. Some of these holes are lightning holes, and some of them are holes for the inboard exhaust pipes of the Lion engines. That had to go somewhere, and it went down through the frame. Oh, and the front suspension is a thing of absolute beauty. Fantastic ball-type joints operating upper and lower wishbones, U-joint there on the inside. When the press came in to see this car in this kind of shape, before it went on its first run, they absolutely lost their cool totally. One of them said, "This is a 21st century car. This is not. It's so ingenious, so brilliant." And here's the second season. Reid installed a tachograph here, which was modified, of course, to show speeds up to 400 miles an hour instead of up to 40 miles an hour as a truck would use it or whatever. So he had that to have a better record of what speed they were actually making through the mile, and in fact there is a picture in the book of one of the tachograph discs, so you can see what the pattern was. And here's a good picture of the brake that I told you about. 3-speed transmission, and these big lay rub joints, and here's the outer band brake operated by hydraulic cylinder here, and these are the water delivery pipes to the exterior of the brake, and there are other pipes to the interior of the brake. So all the water is total loss. All the water just runs out and through the brakes and cools them off, and it stopped like a dream. Here's the gang at T&T as the car is completed for the first time. This was used a little bit, but not much, this funny open top canopy. Reid is here with, again, he's looking off in the distance, you know. If I don't look at the camera, they won't notice me, you know, kind of thing. Who else? Thomson. I think that's Taylor back there. He's kind of hiding. Anyway, this is their rollout of the car. And just a look, kind of overview of the car with Taylor and Reid. Obviously, the whole body was lifted off to have access for service. There was no other way to do it. You couldn't have, you know, catches and hatches and things in that structure. You can see here's one of the bulkheads behind Cobb. That was supposed to keep some of the engine noise from driving him nuts. The front cockpit with brake controls and so forth. This was in 1939 with Gilmore Lion was sponsoring the effort, and with the Napier Lion. That was a very nice combination. Now here's Railton in the cockpit, just checking the magneto switches and seeing what's what. Another view of him as they were taking the car back in. This is again 1939 with the slave wheels on that they used when they were just moving the car around. And here's a picture that you won't see anywhere else. It's not the best picture, but it shows one I'd never seen before, that's showing Cobb. The first time he drove the car at Bonneville, he drove it without the body, of course. and you want to see that everything's working properly, and you know, and he took it up to about 250 miles an hour in this condition, and he, as you can imagine, this car had a better power to weight ratio than any Grand Prix car of the period, and most Grand Prix cars up to the, you know, the turbo car era in after the war. It had a phenomenal power to weight ratio. So its ability to accelerate up to speed to get through the mile quickly was fantastic. But that's the way it was first tested by Cobb. And here's the routine for the mounting and demounting of the body. Railton's up, guiding it down. A little bit forward, a little bit back, please. And the push car, the Dodge truck that was loaned by some people that Railton knew in Detroit, where his contacts were extremely good. And these color pictures are all thanks to my friend John Dugdale. John went there in 1939 as a representative of Autocar, and boy, did he take color film with him. Fantastic. And I held these in my personal library for quite some time. They're now in the Revs Institute files, but gee, I kept copies, didn't I? And that gives us this very nice picture of, for example, of Railton and Cobb in 1939. And just a shot of the car taken from the truck as it went away. The first time they ran the car, and it may have been when it was still without the body. There's a lot of smoke from when you just accelerate away from the start with these big aero engines. They make considerable smoke. It doesn't show up too much here, but Dugdale was riding on the truck behind, and it went off, and there was this big smoke bubble in front, and it was blocked out his view. And when it cleared, there was nothing in front of the car, or the truck, nothing in front of the truck. It had gone over the horizon by the time the smoke cleared. It was a peculiar sensation, to say the least. Another view of the car. Of course, it's four-wheel drive. I probably should have mentioned that at the start, but I think that's pretty clear. And in order to have only four wheels, Cobb had to get the weight down, and Cobb and Railton had to get the weight down. So this was according to Dunlop. Dunlop had a rule of how much weight you could put on each one of these tires. George Easton had a car with two Rolls-Royce engines in it, and to handle its weight, he had to have 8 wheels. So he had 4 in front in a kind of tandem arrangement, and then 4 across in the back. And that's in the book. There's an appendix about his car. The Napier Special. Well, in 1936, is that right? Yeah. No, 1938. It did just over 350 miles an hour at Bonneville. And that was a record until Easton just topped it. I think he went 355, something like that. They came back in 1939. They went 369 miles an hour. And then they returned in 1947, when the average speed was 394.196 miles per hour with a one-way run of 403 miles an hour. Which for Cobb, he was pretty happy with that. He wouldn't have minded around 400, but it was getting kind of late in the season, and the salt wasn't really very good, and so they didn't make another effort in 1947. But what a car! And here they're getting, and Railton's getting a bit of, congratulation. He's accepting it, calmly after the 1930 run. And Cobb there as well, and Earl Gilmore of Gilmore Oil, and various nabobs. Now, for a complete change of scene, Campbell decided, okay, I've done 300 in my car, and now I want to go for the water speed record. And he called Railton in, and he said, okay, I think I have some ideas about this, and I'd like to get another designer, Fred Cooper, in. I want to get Fred Cooper to get me be dealing with some of the underbody designs. It was designed as a single step planing boat, one step in the front going across, and a planing boat, and so it was supposed to ride on this step and the rear transom, basically. And Cooper was a very knowledgeable guy who came up with this design. The idea was to, obviously, this was using one of Campbell's Rolls-Royce engines, one of his R-type engines, driving forward to a gearbox and then back all the way so that the angle of the propeller could be correct, and yet the boat as a whole would not be too big. And that's the K3 Bluebird, which set a record at in Italy in 1938, 130.86 miles per hour, new water speed record. And that beat the Americans, who had been setting water speed records for yonks, and very satisfactorily. But it was very clear that that was this boat's limit. Campbell, he said it felt, like it was kind of riding on 2 points, one at the front, one at the rear, and he didn't. The handling was good enough for 130, but he knew that was the limit of the boat. And Railton, of course, by the late 1930s, was spending more time in America, and he was finding out about what the American hydroplane people were doing. And he discovered that they were using a new kind of 3-point riding hydroplane, which had sponsons at 2 sides, was running on these sort of corners, and then running on the transom at the back. And he went to see the guys who kind of and developed and patented this idea in New Jersey. And he said, okay, they didn't want to work with him as such, but they didn't seem to mind him using the concept, which he did. He brought that back, and this boat, K4, was made using the same drivetrain, the engine in the back, driving forward and then back, same gearbox and so on. And right out of the box, literally, in 1939, this K4 went 141.34 miles an hour, upping the record substantially and with no trouble. And it was a terrific achievement, and that record stood for a long, long time, well into the post-war era. Now, Railton was in America in 1939 because his friend Noel Macklin had a better idea. He said, I know we're going to need good boats to chase submarines in the coming war, and I have a clever idea for using a kind of mass production to produce such boats, and I think I know the architects who can design them, and I think I know the engineer who can go to around the world and find the best engines for such boats. And that, needless to say, was Reid Railton, who was put on the board of his new Fairmile Marine Corporation. And just a quick look at a Fairmile Type C. This is fairly well along in the development of the Fairmile range, A, B, and C. This is one of the bigger, later boats, which had 3 Hall-Scott engines. Railton came up with, he was convinced that Hall Scott, which had a factory in Berkeley, California, were the people to go with. They had the designs, they had the capacity to produce, and a reputation that was quite good. And they were keen to work with Macklin. And Macklin was able to negotiate, with Railton's help, an exclusive contract with Hall Scott. So there was a tremendous competition for engines for these light boats at the time. People were trying to figure out where they could get engines for them. So by tying up Hall Scott as a source for the Fairmile boats, Railton did a terrific job. And the Fairmile people introduced a supercharged version of their engine using a supercharger from a McCulloch company in Wisconsin. And I can't give you chapter and verse, but I'm sure that they used some of Railton's know-how in developing this engine. And that was the ultimate version of the Hall Scott Defender engine. With this more powerful engine, Hall Scott needed a better reversing gear. So Railton created a completely new reversing gear, which was manufactured in California for use with these high-performance supercharged V12s in these various boats. And this is just a quick cross-section of this, which worked in such a manner that when it got into forward drive, high gear, it locked up. There was no chance of slipping or breaking things, which was an advantage, obviously. Meanwhile, it's quite a long story, but how shall I put it? Okay. After the war, Malcolm Campbell tried to put a jet engine in his pre-war K4 boat. This was a flop, and then he died, and Donald Campbell obtained the boat. He got the engines. He had to part with the Bluebird land speed record car in order to get the engines, etc. And he tried to put the boat back the way it was when Campbell had set the record in it. But this did not progress. It didn't work well. By that time, in the States, Railton had discovered that the latest high-speed boats were prop riding. And they were, at the back, they were not riding on the transom. They were riding on the bottom half of the propeller in these boats. And the propeller was just partly in the water, but they were going vastly faster. And so Donald Campbell rebuilt his boat as a prop rider. And in order to achieve this, the engine had to be farther forward. The center of gravity of the boat had to be much farther forward. Otherwise, that's what allowed the rear to come up. The weight wasn't so concentrated at the rear and so on. So he built it as a prop rider. And one of his outings with it was to an event in Italy, which gave a prize, the Altranza Cup, for the fastest 2 laps during a 4-lap race. And although they had trouble getting away, and so they were not winning the race overall, they easily won the Altranza Cup. And this is when, basically when Donald Campbell, Railton, and his mechanic, Campbell's mechanic, Leo Villa. And this is when Leo Villa realized that Donald Campbell had what it takes when you're driving a fast marine boat. He really was impressed by what Campbell did, driving that in a race circuit. The final chapter begins at a press conference in New York in, press conference July 1952. Working together across the Atlantic, Railton left, and Peter Duquesne of Vosper's on the right had come up with a concept for a water speed record breaking boat for John Cobb in the middle. They did so with a grueling series of tests of different kinds of shapes and versions of the boat, but the basic concept, which was Railton's, was that you would ride on one sponson at the front and two at the rear. The idea being that doing it that way, there was much less likely to be a lot of lift at the front of the boat because it presented less area to the air, and you had these stabilizing sponsons at the rear, and so it wouldn't be subject to lift at the front, which is a bugbear, obviously, of any boat skating along the surface of the water. So this is just one of, I would say, dozens of models that they made and tested in a towing tank in the south of England. And the ultimate layout that they came up with was exactly that, an arrangement in which the big jet engine, the engine they were using was a de Havilland, and it was a centrifugal supercharger engine, so it was quite bulky, forcing a quite high back end of the boat. It rode on one ski or one skid or one planing surface here, and one at the end of each sponson on the side. That was the concept. And of course, air inlets for the jet engine and so forth. And this boat was arrived at after much difficult transatlantic collaboration between Railton and Peter Duquesne at Vosper's, who built the boat. A cross-section of it gives an idea of the construction, which was basically wood. At the time, people thought, oh, it's polished aluminum, it looks like an aluminum boat. There was some aluminum in it at Railton's insistence. There are aluminum in these beams holding the sponsons. There's a kind of arch of aluminum here. He also wanted an arch of aluminum here to kind of, protect the front and brace the front of the structure more, but that got overlooked by Vosper's in the course of building the boat. That's the basic concept. There she is under construction, completing construction really at Vosper's. Here you can see these arches of aluminum and going down to the sponson attachments, and just the one running shoe just underneath here. As that's arranged. And here's Cobb on Loch Ness with the boat. It was a very powerful jet engine, 500 pounds thrust for the time. I think it was actually the most powerful jet that was available. Loaned him by a friend, Frank Halford. Another view of the rear of this machine, which one of the problems was that, if you can put it that way, that this jet exhaust was quite high off the water, quite high. So there was quite a force pushing the nose downward. The sloping of the sponsons was also intended to force the rear up and the nose down. The idea being that we wanted to keep the nose down under all circumstances. On a run, which we have the sort of tape for in the book, the very first serious timed run for the record, Cobb was timed during the flying mile at just over 206 miles per hour, which was first time on water over 206 miles per hour, over 200 miles an hour. Shortly after completing that flying mile, the boat seemed to explode. And you can see here very suddenly a gout of water is coming up through the cockpit, basically. So it's obvious that the front shoe, which they had a lot of trouble with during the trials, they had to keep bracing it and so on, had collapsed, and as a result, the boat more or less exploded. And Cobb, while not visibly damaged, was dead. So that was terrible, of course. That was terrible. And we attempt in the book to give some idea about why perhaps Cobb went faster than he intended to on that run, when you look at the peak speeds he reached and so forth. So I'll be interested to know if you agree with my assessment of how that all came about. But it turned out that Cobb's executor, David Wickens, I think, was a Brooklands racer who was keen to work with Railton to build a new boat that would show that the basic concept of the nose, single nose shoe and sponsons and so on was correct if properly executed. And this is the test model that they built to make a first effort at seeing how this would work. This is the front shoe here. This is the sort of planing surface to get it up to speed, and the two sponsons is the bottom of it, of course. And this work was all done in cooperation with George Easton, who was a very close friend of Cobb and Railton. And Railton had a lot of time for Easton. He thought he was a very thoughtful guy. He had been the team leader at Loch Ness when Cobb crashed. So he knew something about this problem and about the situation they were in. Anyway, Easton, before this got tested, Easton had another idea. He went back to work with MG on record breaking at Bonneville. And I think he could see that this wasn't going to go, or maybe Donald Campbell was going to get in the way, or Campbell was showing more success with his water speed record boat at the time. So for one reason or another, plus the fact that this was in Britain, Reid was in California, it was not easy. So it didn't happen, as it happens. Just a closing mention or two of his work with Hudson. He had a consulting contract with Hudson in America starting in the, he did work on an ad hoc basis during the 30s, and then after the war he had a regular contract with Hudson for consulting engineering. And in the 30s Hudson are using him in an advertisement, British ace engineer says, I like Hudson's engines, for example. And he did. He did. This is an honest quote. He felt they were making a great engine. And here's Reid in 1939, looking at the 1940 Hudson with its new grill arrangement, which they went after speed records with at Bonneville. And this is an impressive picture, because in my view, although we know American cars are big, this makes the Railton Special look small. I mean, it does kind of show that the car was not huge. We're used to thinking of it as very large, but it wasn't that big. Here it is next to Cobb and one of the Hudson racers. And they took good advantage of Reid's standing in the world of speed in promoting Hudson cars. And I'm sure Reid was a very close friend of Frank Spring, who was the chief stylist or chief engineer of styling for Hudson. And when Hudson came out in 1948 with a new model, I I'm sure that this is Railton influenced, that Spring and Hudson, who talked together a lot of times and met frequently in California, we're exchanging ideas. And this is about as streamlined as you could get for an American car, or frankly for any car in 1948. And indeed it had a kind of sub-chassis arrangement, not unlike some of the Reid's designs, with the rear of the frame going outside the wheels, and the basic side members being very low, and being people sitting down inside the middle of the car. So I think there's a Railton influence in this new 1948 Hudson. And this is something that Sally turned up in the course of our research, a slide rule, which he said bought in 1912 and used all my life, RAR. Gives a little idea of his loyalty. In 1936, he did buy, or T&T bought for him a 20-inch job with a magnifying glass, just to give him a little more precision if he wanted to use it. And whenever he's asked about his car, the car that he's most proud of, he doesn't fail to mention the Railton Special, which is why this picture of Reid with a model of the Railton Special in his later years is a nice one to use to close off this rather lengthy presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm acutely aware of the time at the moment, and there's a few people squirming a little bit. Are there any questions? We can just take a few, because there are a couple of other things we want to get through. Any questions? Should be on.
What happened to Railton? How did he die suddenly? Did he just die of old age? What happened to him?
No, he did not. He did not. As far as I know, he didn't contract a particular illness. He was hospitalized. I would say old age was, as far as I know, the guilty party. He was hospitalized for some months toward the end of his life, which came in 1977. So he was, 82, thereabouts. He'd been a lifelong smoker. You'll scarcely find a picture of him without a cigarette. We've tried to, we had to airbrush them out of one picture, I think. But he liked the outdoors. He enjoyed California, the backwoods and up on the mountains and so on. That was a wonderful country for him. And so he was, but I'd say natural causes. Yep.
Carl, another question over here.
Mm-hmm.
Carl, you've obviously written several books over the years. What attracted you to Reid Railton as a subject to write a book on?
Well, I had pictures cut out of Life magazine pasted on the wall of my room from the 1947 record attempt. Maybe the 39 too. I'm not sure. Probably the 39 as well. I've always considered his Railton Special to be the best engineered car ever conceived. I don't think anyone has ever, designing for a purpose, anyone has ever surpassed the amount of thought and consideration that he put into every cubic inch of this car. So it's always been my feeling that it really was his, this had to be an amazing person who designed this car. I would have, one day I would have just gotten around to writing a book about that car. But it turned out, with Sally's interest and her research and so on, that we made a book about Reid, and we included the car, of course. And as I say, I did write about Reid for Automobile Quarterly in 1972, something like that. I got a lot of satisfaction from doing that. And now written something that's 40 times longer than the article I wrote at the time.
One more question, ladies and gentlemen. Yes. There we go.
That brilliant AQ story that inspired you, you interviewed Reid on that time. Could you just tell us a little bit about the man?
I spoke to him on the phone.
Oh, it was on the phone?
Yeah, I did. My friend Dean Batchelor. And I explain in the book that Dean Batchelor had designed a Bonneville car that took a lot of ideas from the EX135. And I don't think Dean had seen Railton at that time, but later on he did. He did go up to visit him, and I got his contact details from Dean, and I had a phone conversation with him, which was very helpful. There are a number of quotes in the book including the last sentences that are from my phone conversation.
I wonder if Sally can tell us a little bit about her father, I mean, his character. I mean, I'm amazed he had any time for children.
Well, more than anything else, he was funny, and I don't think that ever comes across. He used to make John Cobb, his feet went up in the air, he was laughing so hard. He was funny, he was considerate, he was fair-minded, he listened to one, he said, well, the music, yes, he was very musical. He played the violin, he had a nice voice, and had probably the most sophisticated speaker system, stereo system in the Bay Area. And they would give him records to try because he knew they might be good or bad or not so good, and he had to take them home to check out on his system. So half of them went back. I don't know, he was an absolutely marvelous man. Wonderful father.
I think that's the end. Karl Ludvigsen, ladies and gentlemen. Now, one final thing that we'd like to do. Sally and I had several conversations via the phone, and we let her know that a couple of weeks ago, our director and chief executive, Alan Wynne, we had an evening here, and when he retired, and we auctioned an original painting of the Napier, of our Napier at Railton. And Sally wanted a bid for it, and I said to her, probably not a good idea. I couldn't let her know because we've had another one done for you. So if you'd like to come up. If you wondered what was behind the checkered flag, this is by our artist in residence who's here tonight, John Were. John, if you're still here, thank you so much for doing this. Sally, that's for you. It is a limited edition for you to take back home. Thank you very much indeed. That's an absolute pleasure. Me. More photographs. Okay. Get Simon's ear in at the same time. Thank you. Lovely. All yours. Thank you. That's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being with us this evening. Okay. Next highlight, raffle time. Don't worry, there is a can of WD-40. Good man. Thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, you're in a great audience. There's one person I want to thank. That's Rebecca Lepard for helping me create this evening's event. Thank you for your time. And thank you. See you again. And the books are on sale. Eric's just waving at me. The books are on sale at a phenomenal discount, and they will be signed. So form an orderly queue. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen.